It was just an old boxing gym, they said. Let it go. The construction foreman didn't even look twice as the heavy machinery clawed into the sagging roof of Liberty Boxing Club, sending shards of wood and plaster raining onto the cracked concrete below. No one paused. No one apologized. The faded sign bearing the proud old name clattered to the ground, splitting in two. From the rooftop, the tattered American flag Stallone had hung decades ago caught the morning breeze one last time before slipping free and drifting into the dust-filled air. But the next morning, the whole city fell silent when something no one expected appeared on the streets. Who were they honoring? And why had a forgotten fighter stirred a city that had long since stopped remembering its old champions? Still believe respect always finds its way home? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories where honor speaks louder than money. Sylvester Stallone, 78 years old now, had built his life on resilience, both on screen and off. But today, standing across the street from where his beloved gym was being torn down, he felt smaller than he had in all the battles he'd fought, fictional or real. Liberty Boxing Club wasn't much to look at anymore, tucked between a shuttered bakery and a boarded-up hardware store on a tired street in South Philadelphia. But to Stallone, it had been everything. A place where lost boys became men, where young fighters learned discipline, respect, and the value of getting back up after a hard fall. He had bought the building himself in 1982, using earnings from his first big movie paychecks. It was his gift to the city that had shaped him, and it had served as a second home for generations of working-class kids. Yet none of that mattered now. A luxury condo development was coming to Passyunk Avenue. City Hall had already rubber-stamped the project. No hearings, no appeals. Progress, they called it. Stallone watched silently as bulldozers chewed through the battered ring where 1,000 young fighters had once dreamed of greatness, their sweat soaking into canvas now turned to rubble. Across the street, young professionals sipping cold brews glanced at the demolition with mild curiosity before returning to their Instagram feeds. An Uber driver honked impatiently, maneuvering around the blocked road. No one remembered anymore. No one cared. The afternoon dragged into evening. Stallone stayed, his old gym bag slung over one shoulder, his hands gripping the frayed leather straps tightly enough to whiten his knuckles. In that bag were the last remnants of Liberty Boxing Club, a pair of ancient gloves, stitched and restitched over the years, a faded photo of him and his first class of students, the cracked brass bell they used to ring after every fight, win or lose, memories packed into canvas and dust. Later, back at his small apartment above Sal's tailor shop on Tasker Street, Stallone sat at his worn kitchen table, staring at the gloves. The room was small, barely bigger than a locker room, but it was enough. It had always been enough. On the wall hung a black and white photo of Rocky Marciano throwing a right hook, a reminder of why Stallone had ever dared to dream he could be something more than a nobody from the rough side of town. He picked up the gloves, turning them over in his hands, feeling the worn leather against his fingers. They smelled faintly of sweat and old triumphs, or maybe just stubbornness. The kind that doesn't know how to quit even when the world moves on without you. There was a knock at the door. Stallone didn't move. The knocking came again, louder this time. Finally, with a grunt, he rose and opened the door to find Salvatore Mancini, his longtime neighbor, and one of Liberty's oldest students, standing there with a six-pack of Ewingling and a heavy heart written across his face. "They didn't have to do it like that, Sly," Sal said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Not without a word. Not without giving you a chance." "They gave me plenty of chances," Stallone said, settling back into his chair. "I just couldn't outbid a billionaire." They drank in silence. Outside, the city bustled on, oblivious. Liberty Boxing Club was already yesterday's news. In the developers' plans, it was just a footnote. Former structure cleared, site ready for groundbreaking. Sal fidgeted with the cap of his bottle. "You know, we could," he started, but Stallone shook his head. "No protests," Stallone said quietly. "No speeches. No fights." His voice was even, but there was a heaviness behind it, the weight of too many fights fought alone. But Sal wasn't the only one who felt the injustice gnawing at him. Someone had filmed the demolition. A grainy clip showing Stallone standing alone across the street, clutching his gym bag, watching in silence as the bulldozers tore through the heart of South Philly. Sal's teenage granddaughter posted it online that night. She captioned it simply, "This man taught my father to fight. He taught my brothers to respect themselves. He taught me how to believe. And we let them tear it all down." The post caught fire. Within 24 hours, the story had spread across social media like wildfire. Former students began sharing their own memories. City firefighters, police officers, construction workers, nurses, all of them had a story about how Stallone's gym had kept them off the streets, out of jail, away from the grave. Local radio shows picked it up. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a Sunday cover story. "Liberty lost what we forgot when we forgot our own." Talk shows debated it. Even a few city councilmen, sensing a public relations opportunity, mumbled something about reassessing community preservation efforts. But Stallone stayed silent. He rose each morning before the sun, out of habit, if not necessity. He still jogged along the empty sidewalks, his knees creaking in protest. He still punched at the shadows in his cramped living room, gloves thudding against the worn, heavy bag he'd strung up between two closet doors. And every morning, after his workout, he made his way to the corner of 9th and Passyunk, where Liberty Boxing Club had once stood. There was nothing left but a rectangle of dirt now, surrounded by a chain-link fence and a sign advertising Liberty Lofts, luxury residences coming soon. Stallone would lean on the fence, watching the wind scatter dust across the empty lot, remembering. He didn't expect anyone else to remember. Not really. He knew how the world worked. Heroes were disposable. Memories were short. Still, on the 10th morning after the demolition, something strange happened. On the 10th morning after Liberty Boxing fell, Stallone found himself waking before the alarm, a habit too deeply carved into his bones to break. He tugged on his old hoodie, laced up the battered sneakers that had seen better decades, and made the familiar walk toward 9th and Passyunk. The November air bit at his cheeks, a sharpness that reminded him he was still alive. As he rounded the corner, Stallone stopped short. The vacant lot where the gym had once stood was no longer empty. A crowd had gathered, spilling into the streets, their breath misting in the cold morning air. Men in work boots and faded Eagles jackets, women holding coffee cups, teenagers with cameras, old-timers in folding chairs. Hundreds of people, maybe more, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the rubble, as if waiting for something sacred to rise from the dust. Stallone blinked, confused. A group near the front parted as Sal approached, his face glowing with a mixture of pride and nerves. "We're not letting them erase you, Sly," he said, clapping Stallone on the back. "Not without a fight." Before Stallone could reply, a voice rang out over a portable speaker system someone had rigged to a pickup truck. It was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, standing on the tailgate, holding a microphone with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "My father grew up on this block," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "He used to tell me about a place where you could walk in broken and walk out whole, where a man named Stallone taught you to stand tall, no matter how many times you got knocked down. They tore down the building, but they can't tear down what it meant. Not if we remember." The crowd erupted in applause. A fire captain stepped forward next, his turnout jacket streaked with soot, his helmet tucked under his arm. He spoke of the discipline he'd learned at Liberty Boxing, the second chance it had given him after his brother's death. An elderly woman in a Temple University hoodie told how Stallone had trained her son to box after the boy's father abandoned them. One by one, voices rose from the crowd, weaving a tapestry of gratitude, love, and aching loss that wrapped Stallone tighter than any championship belt ever could. Reporters showed up by mid-morning, local channels at first, then regional ones. Drones buzzed overhead. Someone set up a makeshift memorial against the chain-link fence. Gloves, photographs, handwritten notes. In the center, a new American flag was planted, its colors bright against the gray sky. Stallone stood motionless, overwhelmed not by the noise or the attention, but by the realization that maybe, just maybe, the world had not forgotten after all. Sal leaned in close. "City Hall's watching. The developers are sweating. They thought nobody cared. They were wrong." Across the street, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Derek Miles, Keystone Development's smooth-talking mouthpiece, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his tailored overcoat. He surveyed the crowd with tight lips and furrowed brows, cell phone pressed against his ear, barking orders. Stallone met his gaze briefly. Derek looked away first. By noon, the crowd had grown so large that the police were called in to manage traffic. Officers arrived, but made no effort to disperse anyone. A few even nodded respectfully towards Stallone as they passed. A group of students from South Philly High marched up, waving hand-painted signs that read, "Save Liberty," and "Stallone is our champion." From somewhere deep in the mass of bodies, a chant began to rise. "Stallone! Stallone! Stallone!" It rolled over the streets like a tide, gathering force until it seemed the very buildings shook with it. Stallone, never one to chase the spotlight, raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. He stepped toward the makeshift podium, a crate someone had placed near the fence, and cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was gravelly but strong. "I ain't good at speeches," he said, drawing a ripple of laughter. "Never have been. Never wanted to be." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, some familiar, many strangers. This gym, it wasn't just a place to throw punches, it was a place to learn how to take 'em and still get up. The crowd leaned in, the city itself seeming to hold its breath. They can tear down walls. They can pave over the past, but they can't take away what you build in here, he said, tapping his chest over his heart. Not if you remember it. Not if you pass it on. Applause thundered so loudly it seemed to bounce off the skyline. Stallone stepped back, blinking hard against the sting in his eyes. He wasn't a man given to public displays of emotion. but the sight of so many people standing for what Liberty Boxing represented was almost more than he could bear. Later that afternoon, the mayor arrived. Forced by public pressure and keen political instincts, she waded into the crowd with cameras flashing. She shook Stallone's hand awkwardly, murmuring something about community legacy and valuing our local heroes. A hastily called press conference followed on the courthouse steps. Facing a barrage of questions, the mayor announced that the city was issuing an immediate halt order on the condo project pending review. A committee would be formed to explore options for preserving the site. Cheers erupted, horns blared from passing cars, and strangers hugged in the street. For the first time in a long time, Philadelphia didn't feel like a city eating its past to make room for its future. It felt like a city remembering who it was. That night, Stallone sat alone on his front stoop, the six-pack from Sal untouched beside him. The old gloves rested in his lap, their leather darkened by the sweat of 100 forgotten battles. He listened to the distant hum of celebration still echoing down the narrow streets. It wasn't just about him. It never had been. It was about every kid who had walked through the doors of Liberty Boxing carrying fear and walked out carrying hope. It was about every punch that taught perseverance, every fall that demanded resilience, every scar that told a story of survival. He tilted his head back, gazing up at the stars barely visible between the rows of streetlights. Somewhere deep inside, the boy he had once been, the one nobody believed in, smiled. He had been seen. He had been remembered. Maybe that was enough. But the story wasn't over yet. A week after the rally, South Philadelphia woke to an unusual sight. Trailers had pulled into the empty lot under the cover of night, carrying lumber, steel beams, and rolls of canvas. Volunteers in work boots and hoodies crowded the space where Liberty Boxing Club had once stood, measuring, sawing, hammering. No glossy architectural firm, no corporate sponsors. Just ordinary men and women, many of whom had once trained at Liberty, now reclaiming what the city had almost allowed to disappear. At first, Stallone thought it was a mistake. He shuffled down to the site that morning, expecting maybe a few sentimental plaques or a temporary art installation. But as he leaned on the chain-link fence, he saw it clearly. They were rebuilding. Not a luxury condo, not a modern gym with juice bars and tanning beds, but a faithful replica of the place he had poured his soul into 4 decades ago. Sal spotted him first and waved him over. "Surprise," he said, grinning like a kid. "We got a little help. Veterans groups, the firefighters union, old boxing federations, even some of the new businesses chipped in. Guess they figured it's good PR to stand with a real champ." Stallone just stared, the lump in his throat growing larger as he took in the scene. An old friend from his earliest classes, now a gray-haired carpenter, was supervising the framing. A former student turned architect had drawn up blueprints based on photos and memory. A team of teenagers, some wearing their father's old gym jackets, ran back and forth hauling supplies, eager to be part of something that mattered. Word spread fast. Local restaurants started sending over free sandwiches and coffee. A union local donated portable lighting so the work could continue into the night. Musicians played on street corners to lift the volunteers' spirits. Even the city, belatedly sensing which way the political winds were blowing, issued expedited permits and waived certain fees. By the third day, the frame of the new gym stood proud against the autumn sky, a skeletal echo of what had been lost but never forgotten. Through it all, Stallone remained a quiet presence. He refused every interview request, declined offers to lead speeches or accept awards. He wasn't building a monument to himself. He was watching a community rebuild its soul. On the morning of the dedication, the new Liberty Boxing Club gleamed under a crisp blue sky. The fresh paint, simple white walls, with the old red and blue trim, seemed to catch the light just right, making the building look both brand new and timeless all at once. Inside, the floorboards creaked familiarly underfoot. The heavy bags swung gently in the breeze, and the old bell, rescued from the rubble, polished to a soft glow, hung above the ring, ready to toll again. The crowd stretched down the block, spilling into the side streets. Families with strollers, veterans in faded uniforms, teenagers in Liberty t-shirts, journalists with notepads and cameras, all there to witness something rare. A neighborhood standing up not for profit, but for pride. Stallone stood near the entrance, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his worn jacket, trying to look invisible. It didn't work. As soon as he was spotted, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd, sweeping down the line like a spark catching dry brush. They chanted his name again, loud and strong. Not for the actor who had once played a fighter, but for the real fighter who had spent his life lifting others up. A local councilwoman stepped onto a makeshift platform and raised a hand for quiet. In her other hand, she held a brass plaque covered in a simple cloth. She spoke briefly about the gym's legacy, about the lessons taught there that had built not just boxers, but better citizens. Then, with a flourish, she pulled away the cloth. The plaque read, "Liberty Boxing Club, dedicated to Sylvester Stallone, champion of South Philadelphia, for teaching us to stand back up again and again." Another wave of applause rolled through the crowd. Sal pushed Stallone gently toward the platform. For a moment, Stallone hesitated. Public speaking had never been his arena. He was a man of action, of work, not words. But the faces looking up at him weren't asking for a speech. They were offering thanks. He climbed the steps slowly and stood before them, sunlight catching the silver in his hair, the weathered lines on his face etched deeper by time, but softened by the moment. He cleared his throat. "I don't know what to say," he began, voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd see something like this. When they tore down the old gym, I thought maybe the world had moved on. I thought maybe all we did here didn't matter anymore." He paused, scanning the faces before him, seeing not strangers, but threads in a tapestry he'd spent his life weaving. "But I was wrong. You remembered. You cared. And because of that, this place lives again. You gave me back something I didn't even know I had lost. Thank you." The crowd responded not with words, but with a long, rolling cheer that seemed to shake the air itself. That afternoon, as the celebration continued with food trucks and music and impromptu sparring exhibitions inside the new gym, a small ceremony took place quietly behind the building. A simple wooden bench was unveiled facing east toward the morning sun, carved with just 3 words, "Sit, remember." Thank it had been Stallone's only request, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in a ring, but in the stubborn, tender fight to hold on to the things that matter. As dusk fell and the crowds drifted home, Stallone sat on that bench, his hands resting loosely on his knees, watching the last orange light of the day reflect off the new gym's windows. Beside him sat Michael Torres, a young man whose father Stallone had trained years ago, now a teacher bringing his own students to liberty. They spoke little, content to share the quiet. The city moved on around them, cars honking, children laughing, old men arguing baseball scores. But here, on this small patch of reclaimed ground, time seemed to slow, then settle. In a world chasing faster, bigger, newer, Liberty Boxing Club stood as a stubborn, beautiful reminder that some things are worth fighting for, not with fists, but with memory, with gratitude, with love. Sylvester Stallone, the fighter, the teacher, the soul of South Philadelphia, smiled to himself as he watched a new generation wrap their hands, step into the ring, and prepare to learn the oldest lesson of all. It's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. If you believe stories like this deserve to live on, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell us, who in your life taught you how to stand back up when life knocked you down?